Thank you very much, CAS. Honorable Cabinet Secretary Margaret Copier, Cabinet Secretary Monica Juma, Cabinet Secretary Rachel Lumamo, and I wonder if CS Fred Matiangi is here. Greetings from the UN family. Excellencies Eric Lundberg, the Ambassador of Finland to Kenya, and Excellency Lisa Stradl-Bayer, the High Commissioner of Canada to Kenya, two countries that really represent and champion the issue of women's rights, the actions of feminism, the advancement of gender equality. So it's truly a privilege to actually serve with them in this great country. Principal secretaries present, my colleagues from the UN family, civil society members, ladies and gentlemen. It is an honor for the United Nations in Kenya to join you today on this very special occasion on the launch of the second Kenya National Action Plan for the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security. As a matter of fact, when I look at the lineup of the cabinet of President Kenyatta, it has already achieved, should I say, the two-third gender bill, at least at the cabinet level. And I want to congratulate you there. Some of the most important positions today are being led and held by women in Kenya. I also want to commend the government of Kenya as it launches this plan. This groundbreaking resolution, which was adopted 20 years ago this October, acknowledges the impact of conflict on the lives of women and girls, but more importantly, recognizes that women's invaluable contributions to conflict prevention, resolution, peacekeeping, and peace building. And I want to particularly acknowledge the role of Cabinet Secretary Margaret Copier and the excellent team that she leads, together with CS Fred Matiangi, the Minister of Interior, for their leadership in the development of the Kenya Second National Action Plan, for overseeing the implementation of the first action plan through a whole of government approach that resulted in, for example, amongst other things, notable increase of women in peace committees and in the security sector. Certainly, Finland stands out as a role model for the support that it gives in Kenya for the technical assistance to this entire process. And to my colleagues in UN Women, led by Anna Mutavati, who are doing an outstanding job in terms of the technical assistance they are providing. In fact, you should be aware that our entire UN development assistance framework is underpinned by two very critical issues, gender and youth. And UN Women have been providing leadership in the first part of the strategic results area of the UN Development Assistance Framework, or UNDAF, which is on the governance side. So therefore, the choice of the theme for the launch of highlighting the centrality of women, peace and the agenda and the COVID-19 pandemic is particularly timely given the unprecedented situation we find ourselves in. The Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Amina Mohammed, has said that today women have a key role to play. There is evidence that countries led by women have responded better to the current crisis and are performing better than countries run by men. In recovering better, we must not lose sight of their leadership that women can provide alongside men. For Kenya, COVID-19 is also occurring against a backdrop of increased humanitarian situations due to the floods, the locust invasions, and this comes on the heels of a protracted drought that this country has seen since 2016. In the country, we are also cognizant of the risks COVID-19 acting as a driver for conflict, exacerbating social instability and fueling distrust within and between communities, therefore fueling pre-existing inequalities and gendered vulnerabilities. So in order to flatten this curve, in some parts of Kenya, addressing insecurity is critical. In Kenya, the early data indicates that women and children and vulnerable groups are facing distinct increased risks due to COVID-19, from health to the economy, security to social protection, including increasing levels of gender-based violence. As CS Margaret Copier recently remarked, that the lockdown, or perhaps the curtailment of movement, has already seen a 45% spike on gender-based violence. This is something we have to work together to put a stop to. Ladies and gentlemen, in the current peace and security context, characterized by new and emerging threats that COVID-19, violent extremism, elections-related violence, climate change, and protracted displacement, the implementation of women, peace and security agenda is even more critical. The transformative potential of Women, Peace and Security agenda lies in the creation of inclusive and democratic governance and peace processes, as well as in addressing gender inequality as one of the root causes of conflict and instability. Therefore, implementing the National Action Plan is imperative to achieving the goals set out in the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals Agenda, the African Union Agenda 2063, and Kenya's own Vision 2030. For the UN in Kenya, this is translated through the United Nations Development Assistance Framework, which is the UN's blueprint to the support to the government of Kenya. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just roll back a bit and say why it is a great privilege for me to be the resident coordinator of a country and to the entire UN country team. This is a country that actually ended up giving the world the Sustainable Development Goals. It actually echoes the vision of 2030 and the open working group that Kenya, together with Hungary and Ireland, led to the realization of the SDGs. And therefore, we in Kenya must become a model for the rest of Africa for the Sustainable Development Goals. And the principle of leaving no one behind is enshrined in the Kenyan Constitution, is enshrined in the Vision 2030 of this country, and is mirrored beautifully in the Sustainable Development Goal. And it recognizes that all nations, regardless of where they are and what their economic situation is, must endeavor to include all people from each segment of society and to reach those who are furthest behind. In this context, we must ensure that we adhere to this principle to seek to eliminate gender-specific barriers that continue to prevent women's meaningful leadership and participation in governance, peace, and security processes. Despite the footprint of the agenda growing globally and domestically, noting the commendable progress made around legislation, policy, and political will, social barriers continue to hinder the participation of women in traditionally masculine spaces, and these need to be addressed. Women continue to remain in the periphery and are systematically excluded from the formal and informal governance in peace and security. Yet we know that women play an integral role in our societies in promoting peaceful communities and conflict prevention, therefore making peace more robust and sustainable. According to the UN's Women's Global Study on the implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1325, there is compelling evidence to suggest that women's participation in peace negotiations increases the possibility of a peace agreement lasting up to 35% more than if women were left out of the process. Additionally, women have played an essential role in accelerating economic revitalization in the aftermath of disasters and crises, promoting inclusive recovery, and in contributing to sustainable peace. There is therefore need for these lessons to be replicated in the COVID-19 response and recovery processes. I commend CS Margaret Kobia for the leadership she is giving to the socio-economic recovery process. Ladies and gentlemen, now the work begins to implement the National Action Plan, keeping in mind the lessons that we learned from the first National Action Plan that will inform our collective efforts towards moving this forward. As we commemorate the 20th anniversary of the UN Security Council Resolution 1235, this year we must work together, drawing on young women, women's rights groups at community level, and the key stakeholders to bring the promise of 1325 to the women and girls of Kenya. The Kenyan government has demonstrated its continuous commitment to this agenda, and the next step is to translate this commitment and framework into actions building on the gains and achievements made to date. Last year in November, Kenya hosted the International Conference for Population and Development. All of us witnessed President Kenyatta make a clarion call to ending FGM in this country. And trust me, Kenya will be that model that other countries will emulate in the embrace of getting rid of female genital mutilation. An important step forward, Kenya is showing the way. I would like to conclude by assuring you, Cabinet Secretaries, the Government of Kenya, of the United Nations' full commitment in supporting Kenya in the implementation of the constitutional commitments to achieving gender equality and the empowerment of women and furthering UN's prevention agenda. We remain committed to advocating for an inclusive and coordinated approach to address complex issues such as women's engagement in governance, peace and security, and in translating policy into action. I want to take this opportunity to also make once more an appeal to the government of Kenya, to all the political leaders, to please pass the 2/3 gender bill. This is going to be a historic move that will truly transform truly transform Kenya as a center for equality and the gender equality space that we are trying to advance towards, giving more momentum to SDG 5. Cabinet Secretaries, I'm honored to have had this opportunity to address you all. Thank you very much.